In the 1670s, in this here, America, before it became the United States, race was created. There were those who had been regulated to black, who happened to be laborers in the said area, and those who happened to be white, who were previously Christian English gentlemen. However, as we fast forward to 2025, it seems like that another race has been created. Yes, dear viewer, have you ever heard of the Zizians? Well, Aaron has the story. Take it away, Aaron.
It's a crime spree straight from movies and TV. In 2016, Jack Lasoda, going by the pen name Ziz, started publishing, quote, a dark, rambling blog, promoting an extreme mix of rationalism, ethical veganism, anarchism, and other value systems, end quote. She gained a following, and her followers called themselves Zizians. In 2019, they were arrested for blocking the exits at a Center for Applied Rationality meeting. 3 years later, in August 2022, Ziz faked her death. Her mother claimed to the Coast Guard that she drowned off of a boat. An online obituary was even published. A few months after that, in the fall of August 2022, they attacked their landlord when he had tried to evict them. He was impaled and partially blinded, but he fought back and survived the attack. Some of the Zizians were charged with murder and attempted murder. A few months later, the landlord was actually killed. And the alleged murderer, Maximilian Snyder, was charged and is still in police custody. The AP does not identify him as a member of the Zizians. A few months later, the parents of one of the members of the Zizians, they were murdered in their home. A voice on their house's doorbell camera can be heard saying, "Mom." In January 20th of 2025, authorities state that a border agent was shot and killed by members of the Zizians. Teresa Youngblood, when the agent pulled them over, one of the passengers, another member of the group, also died. Thankfully, the crime spree is over, as just a few weeks ago, Lasoda and the daughter of the murdered Philadelphia couple were arrested in Maryland on charges of trespassing, obstructing and hindering, and possession of a handgun. This story is from the AP News by Mcasey and Mcasey on February 17th, 2025, and another article by Holly Raymer, Patrick Whittle, and Mark Scolforo on February 15th, 2025. Cynthia.
You know, I am not convinced that the crime spree of the Zizians is over. I think that they're just taking a break until they get enough Ziz in their ears in order for them to go to Ziz again. But we're here to do a show and actually talk seriously. So why the hell am I on this show? Regardless, AJ, the Zizians appear to have started an online intellectual community before becoming violent. How do online spaces contribute to the radicalization of certain groups? And what are the ethical responsibilities do platforms have in preventing this?
I think it's so easy these days for social media to be able to spread all of these ideas. So it can really become problematic. I'm not really sure exactly what platforms can do, though, because you want to be able to protect people's privacy, right? Like if you're sending private messages to other people on Facebook or another platform, then you don't want anybody to be able to see that. So if these groups are existing in these private spaces, can we really do anything about it? I'm not exactly sure.
Regardless, I think that platforms should be able to act in some type of accord in order to curtail some of the rhetoric that some of these groups may happen to put out on social media. I'm more concerned about the radicalization that happened to the Zizians in itself when they absolutely got into their own enclaves and been around each other in order for them to be able to pontificate on everything that they have to say. I found it extremely interesting when Aaron mentioned that they were arrested during a protest at the Center for Applied Rationality meeting, which, yeah, I don't see any rationality with these people whatsoever. Ever, I see none. Maybe I'm wrong. Aaron, am I wrong to say that I don't necessarily see any type of rationality, reason, or rhyme when it comes to how the Zizians operate?
Yeah, they don't seem very rational. And I'm not, the articles that we read here didn't really go into too much of their philosophy, just to state that they were ethical vegans, but they use an extreme form of rationality. But like you said, attacking people, being violent, committing crimes, that doesn't seem to be a very rational thing, because you're going to end up getting punished for your violent actions. So I'm not sure exactly what brand of rationality they were espousing and why they would attack other rational groups as well. I'm not. I wasn't able to find too much about their espoused beliefs and what form of rationality they agreed with, but it doesn't seem to be any form of rationality that I've ever come across based on their actions.
The one thing that I was able to find was that they're originally sort of broke off what you mentioned earlier, the Bay Area rationalist group. And this was like a sort of like a more intellectual community that based their ideals on like, uh, applying logic and thoughts and sort of like probabilistic reasoning to like decision makings and life. But most of their members were atheists, from what I was able to find. Like they were not. It wasn't like a specific religion that they followed or anything like that. It was more like they were, I guess, scientific inclined in their beliefs. They did have some pretty out there ideals, like about trying to expand the human capabilities through technology, like making people live forever, sort of like stuff like that. Putting their I guess like your mind on a computer. That was one of the things that I read that they talk about. Other things were like unconventional social norms like polyamory, and like you said, veganism and stuff like that. But I mean, this kind of shows that there's potential for extremism on all sides. Right? Usually we see this in like Christian nationalists and like very, very conservative spaces. But I mean, you can see it in more liberal spaces too. So
yeah, we're all at risk for being radicalized. I'm not sure what the warning signs are. I remember during the War on Terror, there were many people that you would not expect to be radicalized that end up getting radicalized towards in radical Islamic groups. I know of a lot of people's parents, as they get older and get on the internet, they're actually getting radicalized, and the people's parents they're changing in that way. So it's a really scary thing to have happen to somebody, and I'm not sure what we can do to inoculate ourselves against it. It's kind of
yeah, that makes sense. I think that like if we're on looking at a serious note, when we're talking about people that we may not necessarily see as being prone to radicalization, yet they happen to find themselves there, my observation has been mostly contained in the type of media and information that you consume. If you're constantly consuming anarchy, dispositions, other different, things that kind of speak to your own personal angst, there is a very real possibility that you can be radicalized, Now, the only other thing that I can really think that can counteract or inoculate one from radicalization is through critical thinking and skepticism. But when you are in your own echo chamber and the only thing you're consuming is certain propaganda that actually just, speaks to your sensibilities, I don't necessarily see that happening. With that being said, Glenn, the ideology of the Zizians seem to be a mix of anarchism, transhumanism, and radical identity politics. How do these fringe movements form? And what factors make them more likely to turn dangerous?
Well, I think that we see the same pattern time and again. this is really no different than any other doomsday cult, you know, and that goal is always around some charismatic leader who knows the truth, and there's some exclusivity to that truth, you know, that we have something that no one else has. And then that, of course, that dangerous us versus them. And these types of things, anytime you see all those characteristics come together, first, other than you're likely to have a dangerously successful group, we're seeing the pattern that breeds violence, because once you do the us versus them and the othering that goes along with that, you've already laid the groundwork for the most unconscionable behaviors. You know, it really doesn't matter whether it's AI, like this group thinks that we're going to have an AI cataclysmic event, or whether it's, you know, the Christians believing that Jesus is going to wake up after his long nap and he's in a bad mood, or, you know, you see, you know, the Scientology with their belief in ancient entities, whatever all these things are, it really doesn't matter what the underlying claim or the underlying goal is. Once you see that, and as I said, you combine it with that us versus them, you just set up the recipe for disaster of violence against someone, because, well, why not? Are they really real humans, or are they something else? And that's what I think we're seeing here.
You know, it's age old that those who happen to be in power always have to create a boogeyman. What do I mean by that? So if we look at any type of society and you see like certain people that happen to be in power, in order for them to be able to remain in power, they always have to use like some type of outgroup or target an outgroup in order to, you know, create that narrative that you just mentioned, Glenn, about that us versus them. Those people are your problem. Those people are taking your jobs. Those people are taking your wealth. Those people are, you know, creating the issues that we're seeing in our society today that's causing you not to be able to thrive. And I mean, we even see it here in the United States too. Who are we targeting now? The marginalized, people of color, immigrants, right? You know, all these different, you know, groups that may not necessarily have like the proper political protection, being able to always, you know, be the scapegoat for those who happen to be in power. Yet we who happen to be the underlings that's under this particular narrative never see it. Why is that the case? What is the cognitive dissonance that society in of itself, like, you know, those who happen to be just your regular Joe Schmoes possess, that really keeps them from being able to see through the propaganda that those who happen to be in power possess to create that us versus them narrative? AJ, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you know, Glenn made a great point to say that people always try to separate the two, right? Like the people that are in power and the people that are down here on the ground, just marginalized people, immigrants, and people of color, etc. Right? But that is exactly what the messages lately have been sort of pushing forward, like making people feel like they can do that, that they can be more divisive towards minorities. So I mean, I don't know exactly where the cognitive dissonance happens right there. I think maybe it has to do with the way that people are raised, the way that people grow up, the environment that they're in. I don't know exactly. But in this specific case of this quote, I just wanted to point out that even though Jack, the leader of the group, she created this sort of sect from the original rationalist, the same way that Christianity has developed, you know, thousands of denominations because they don't agree with the first one. They sort of like, well, you know, they don't match my ideal, so I'm going to go and make my own separate one. But this was a really, really small group. From what I've seen from the police reports, it was just like 6 people in the cult, as far as they knew, of course. Right? And they decided they could rationalize violence and taking lives. And that's exactly what they did. I think in some of the writings that, from what I've read, she has said that when people were faced with moral differences that couldn't be reconciled, that the only option was to eliminate the opposing force. I don't know if that was how they justified violent acts as necessary to resolve that sort of conflict that they had, that internal conflict. They thought that society had lost, their moral compass, and that it's kind of like Christian nationalism, but for liberals, I guess.
I think that like anybody can be prone to something like this, whether if you are on the far left or on the far right or even in between. I think that like, if you have like somebody who happens to be a charismatic leader that be able to exploit the rhetoric that's sent to you, that they could possibly speak to a particular sensibility that you may not even know that you possess to, get you indoctrinated into their way of thinking. But I think that you, Glenn, and also you, Aaron, mentioned about not really being able to find as much information about this particular story that you really like to have found. And from reading the case, law enforcement has been very tight-lipped about the details of this case. When investigating groups with ideological motivations, where is the balance between public transparency and also preventing further radicalization or copycat crimes? Aaron, I want you to weigh in on that question, and then Glenn, I would like for you to follow up.
Well, I'm usually going to always err on the side that information wants to be free and should be free. And I think that this information should be made public at some point. I can understand the wanting to protect an investigation, wanting to protect certain individuals, et cetera, et cetera. But once justice has run its course, those records should be made publicly, should be made available. I can understand why social media platforms, if it turns out that they're, espousing violence, that they're going to shut that down and delete it. We all know, we've all seen tweets that have been deleted, but somehow somebody screen captured them for posterity and things like that. But I'm going to err on the side of let information be free and give people the knowledge that they need to make their own choices. And hopefully just reading somebody's words don't radicalize you, that it's some combination of reading the words, but then also interacting with people and having that sense of belonging with some group that shares some of your values. Glenn?
Well, first, I have to say that I'm a firm believer that 3 people can keep a secret if 2 are dead. Because the reality is people talk. People trust someone, so they say something to somebody. So with that in mind, trying to keep things hidden, I think, is a fool's errand in the first place. So yeah, let the information out. But one thing I did wanted to touch on that AJ, I think, brought up a point that was very relevant, and talking about how everyone, and you as well, Cynthia, is that everyone can be vulnerable to this. And I think that's something that is really important in us self-reflecting as people who consider ourselves skeptics, is that being a skeptic is not something you arrive to and then you can pontificate from your sitting on your laurels of being a skeptic. It's something that you exercise and you do every day, multiple times. If you can't look at yourself and go, all right, do I feel this way because it's the right choice, or do I feel this way because my friend feels this way and I like them, or I'm biased because of this? And these things slip in so easily that oftentimes you won't even notice it. And it's that ability or awareness, and it's a constant thing of reminding yourself, hey, is this really the right path that I'm on? And I think that when you look at these people calling themselves post-rational and all these other names, we've seen that too, though. Moms for liberty, whatever for justice, whatever for peace, whatever for love. Going back to 1984, the Ministry of Peace was the War Department. We've learned this over and over, that there's this tendency to say, oh, wait, we're the rationals. Man, if somebody says they're rational, then you almost want to say, okay, I should probably suspect everything they're saying. So with that in mind, I think what we're doing here is just seeing the same old pattern recycled, using the same old tools for one very important reason: they work.
Indeed.
And just one final thing I'd like to say
Yes,
is
please, Aaron.
we don't just need skeptics. We need people. We need rebels. We need people who are going to be disobedient. People who are going to go against what our leaders are saying. They can be a little bit anti-authoritarianism, because it's in the following that we get into trouble, right? And so we need people. Everybody needs to be willing to say, no, I'm not going to do that when somebody tells us to do something. We need more rebels in the world.
I agree. Stand up to bullies. Don't allow them to take over. And don't allow them to actually control the narrative.
Yep. Don't trust authority.
Exactly. You know, this case of the Zizians is disturbing. And in its disturbingness, the example of how online communities can spiral from intellectually based into real world violence is absolutely insane. What started as a group of highly intelligent individuals sharing radical ideas became something far more dangerous. This isn't a new phenomenon, though. We've seen it in extremist politics and also political conspiracy movements and even cult-like online subcultures. But it does raise urgent questions about the role of digital spaces in fostering radicalization. The Zizian ideology is a strange mix of anarchism, transhumanism, gender theory, and AI skepticism. But ideology chaos isn't the real issue here. The question is, how do fringe movements cross the line into violence? And then they do. How do we prevent it from infringing on free thought and expression? Then there's the issue of law enforcement. Authorities have tight-lipped this case, likely to prevent further radicalization, but in an age of misinformation, silence can breed conspiracy theories, because we've all seen it before, making groups like the Zizians even more appealing, and those are drawn to those particular fringes. So ultimately, this case forces us to confront a broader reality. Our digital world is reshaping identity, belief, and community in ways we don't fully understand. And if we're not careful, the internet won't just be a breeding ground for ideas, it'll be a breeding ground for danger. But if you, dear viewer, want to hear more ideas that we have breeded from the ground, click here.